So thank you everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport, as is my echo because I have just moved, and as a result I am streaming from a shockingly empty living room. And now the topic for today is developing around existing infrastructure, because I was asking for what topics people were proposing, because I'm thinking way too much about the same Northeast Corridor shit, and there are people who are into that, but that's not everyone. And Hulu so Twitch did exist. So it was still just in .tv. Got it. Yeah, I don't know when I first heard of Twitch, maybe 2014-ish? I don't remember. Anyway, so Hulu was asking me on Fedi about how to develop around existing infrastructure, and this is very much a topic for cities with mature transit systems, with mature economies, which is, I want to say, somewhat of a euphemism for in decline, but it's not entirely a euphemism for in decline. The examples that Huri was asking me about were in the Rhine War. And now, as a Berliner, I feel superior to various other parts of Germany, chief of which is, of course, Bavaria. But I mean, I call the capital, the former capital of Germany, Hauptdorf, and so did others during the division. So the smallness of the individual cities there is one, but fundamentally these are not declining urban cores. So there are places in this area that are in decline, but there are also parts around Berlin that are, by which I mean all of Brandenburg, basically. The issue here is that the Rhine Ruhr is an atypically polycentric metropolitan area, and we're going to have a conversation that's not entirely about polycentric metro area, because that's not our topic. And so what I mean by polycentric is Berlin, there's a center, which is Berlin, and even Frankfurt, which has subsidiary things like Darmstadt or Wiesbaden or Mainz, or whatever, the main center is still Frankfurt. And then here, the centers are Köln. Bonn is an independent center. It has its own little subway. Düsseldorf, probably Wuppertal is an independent center. Dortmund, Essen, Duisburg. I think Bochum may even have an independent subway tunnel. And yeah, so these are a bunch of cities that grew up together. The Ruhr proper, it's a bunch of cities. So Dortmund and Essen are the historic cores, and the area had a lot of coal that was developed during the Industrial Revolution. So this area just filled in, so it's a bunch of it's a large, contiguously built up area, but without a very large center. People are trying to turn Essen into one, but it's not really happening for now. So, wait, what do you mean cities without that, Toronto? Without the polycentricity? I mean, there are people who argue that LA was always polycentric. I do not agree, but LA has a little bit of that as well, with oil wells in different parts of LA County. Sorry. And so the issue here is that, the cores here are doing okay. Really made fun of me 12 years ago over the fact that I live in Berlin Mitte, and you would expect a place like Berlin Mitte to have the lowest voucher for AfD in the country, but apparently there are enough Stasi retirees there or something that AfD got 4% or something like that, or maybe 5%, and then in Köln, I think it was 4%. Köln was less than Berlin Mitte. Which is not really what you see in the declining area. Like Gelsenkirchen, it's run by SPD, but it's also, I think, maybe the highest AfD voting city in West Germany that isn't in neither Bavaria nor Baden-Württemberg. I don't remember. But anyway, so this is a region with cores that are doing okay, but outlying areas that are not, because again, it's a history of coal mining that's everywhere in decline except maybe in China, and even then in China they're trying to transition away from coal. My understanding of the situation in China is that everyone understands that coal is... Oh, I see what you mean. Is that coal is extremely polluting. Forget climate change for a moment. It's extremely polluting. This is why probably the best applet to see air quality on the internet is Chinese, it's AQICN. So they're trying to transition away from it. The issue is that because local party leaders are rewarded based on economic growth, they cheat on all the economic growth statistics. So about the only development metric, or metrics that are impossible to fake are energy output. And this is also why a bunch of papers are trying to look at things like light intensity or energy output in much poorer countries in China to gauge whether their economic statistics are worth anything. I think Ethiopia specifically just lied about its GDP per capita. So that encourages the local party leaders to invest in very cheap, polluting, not very useful energy, so they could say, we have actual economic growth, please promote us. But the attempt of like the top-down party is to transition away from that, and China is much poorer than Germany or the US. So the situation is that this is not New York. In New York, the issue is that New York is a mature transit system, but in New York, everywhere you allow TOD, there will be TOD, unless we're talking the eastern margin of Queens or something like that. So often the issue is trying to... I think the expression for this in urbanism is adaptive use, where you look for a specific piece of infrastructure that, or a specific kind of building, maybe a factory that's no longer used, and you figure out what to do about it. And they said we're not talking about New York, but actually New York is a really good example of this, which is the lofts of Soho. Now that's not really related to public transit, but I mean it's a transit-oriented neighborhood because it's old, but it's not specific to like it's pretty uniform density. So the issue is that so this is called the Lower East Side, but historically this entire area was called the Lower East Side up to 14th Street. The other names are essentially names as these are their areas gentrified that try to distinguish themselves from a neighborhood that is essentially a byword for late 19th, early 20th century immigrant overcrowding. The area was legendarily dense around 1900, possibly the densest place that has ever existed in human history at that scale. And I say at that scale because it was several 100,000 people, and Kowloon Walled City was, I think, 30,000. And so there's the Tenement Museum is here. It's like, so in the same vein, there was also the Lower West Side, which did not have the same immigrant hyperdensity. I think there was maybe more industrial use on the Lower West Side. Hey, Kalidosian. Wait, you can see your house from where? From here or from when it was zoomed on in the Rhine-Ruhr or what? Because you can't see it from like my background. Oh, okay. Rebuild the Kowloon Walled City. I mean, yeah, but I mean, I have an old video about very high density urban forms and how you could do that without severe levels of overcrowding. I don't know how overcrowded the Lower East Side was. I imagine comparable to KWC. KWC was like 4 or 5 square meters per person of residential floor area. New York today is 50, which is high-end by European standards. So New Yorkers talk about how New York apartments are legendarily small. It's part of American culture that New York apartments are legendarily small. Part of it is New York has very high inequality, so the median is much less than the mean. But also, it's just American standards are kind of insanely large housing units. In Berlin, the average is in the 40s, and it does not have that reputation of tiny houses. So anyway, this area was industrial, and what happened was industry declined throughout the 20th century. So suddenly, the city entered into the, let's say, 60s, 70s with all of this disused area. And so artists moved in into and made these into lofts. And I don't know which of these buildings are lofts. Like, it's not something that they can very easily gauge it's something I can very easily gauge you're looking at it on satellite. But the important issue with the lofts is that they're much deeper. So what I mean by deeper is I'm going to hover over something that's definitively not a loft as a comparison. So these look like pre-low tenements because it's a square box. So how deep are we talking? This is 22 meters, and there's a front and a back. This is actually on the deep side. Then you have the old tenements have these dumbbell shapes so that you can have windows here. So talking about depth for that is a little bit weird. And then you have nulo, which have large enough courtyards. Okay, this is a high school. This is a nulo tenement. Usually it's at the corner, the nulo tenement. These are nulo buildings. And the depth, if you do it the silly way, is 12 meters. I shouldn't even say the silly way, like it's not like you have like nearly the entire, like all of these sides have windows. So yeah, most of these apartments like are gonna have depths of like 12, maybe 14 meters. 14 is the norm in Germany. And yeah, I mean there might be inside corners, but still. And the lofts were industrial, so they were not designed around a window in every bedroom because these were industrial loft. So the upshot is that they're very deep. Now, new condos built in the United States today are incredibly deep as well. The reason is that there is a regulation requiring mid-rise buildings to have two means of egress, which means multiple staircases, which kind of forces buildings to be hotel style. Like this is the example. So this is just something that I know because I crammed high-speed rail around it a lot. So here, this is about 21 meters. So this is like a central corridor, and there are apartments that face in, apartments that face out. It's kind of like hotel style, but this is for modern, like this building did not exist when I started crayoning high-speed rail, which was late 2000s. So, like I saw it under construction on satellite. So this is 21st century norms in which, as I mentioned, American housing units are, by European standards, ginormous. And yeah, maybe for some mid-rises it's partly the inefficiency that you have deeper units, but also it leads to certain expectations, like a bathroom in every bedroom, walk-in closet, like a way of using space that does not face a window. Now, lofts did not really do that because they were designed around a much lower living standards. These were, I mean, yeah, today these are rich artists, but in the 60s and 70s they were not rich. So they moved into these areas and essentially reused them as art studios where they would maybe use these big spaces that used to be industrial and live in maybe the part that's closer to the window and then paint or record music or whatever in the inner part. And again, I can't show you exact examples because it's not something that I don't know the history well enough to show you to know which specific building is a loft, and I don't trust myself enough to know through just eyeballing on satellite what the inner depth is. But this is an example of adaptive reuse of buildings, quad buildings. And again, not terribly related to the transit network, even though yes, there are subway lines here, but these were people who were they were artists, they were working from home before it became cool. So maybe it was just city locations so that they could go to shows, go to exhibits, interact with other artists. It was working from home because they were, again, drawing, they were painting, recording music. It was not because they were Zooming instead of having in-office meetings. So socialization still had to be done in person. Selling the art had to be done in person. And so this is an example of adaptive reuse. The technical terms for these norms is bad. Not necessarily. Like a bathroom in every bedroom. I mean, yeah, it is. Like you can there are upper middle classes in wealthy countries that don't have that, but I mean, it's not horrible. And like the United States has the resources to build that. Like the main limit to housing affordability in urban America is not too many bathrooms, it is hilariously tight zoning limits and community processes, reducing the quantity of housing that's being built. So yeah, you can make it cheaper to build housing through removing the 2 means of egress restrictions, which has started to happen, which is nice, but fundamentally it's how much you're allowed to build. Anyway, so you could do this kind of adaptive reuse also as more explicit TOD, where you need to be near a train station, where there are these stations, and again, that was what Huru was talking about. What Huru was talking about here with examples around some stations in Köln and in Essen. And so, okay, wait, people are asking questions. What is my take on subway TOD? Mixed use residential on top of new yards. My take is that it is very rare to be able to pull it off, and the reason is that rail yards are not great for this. This is a blog post from coming in on 10 years ago, which I recommend everyone read. Building on top of rail yards is very constrained. You only do it if the rail yards were designed for this. What do you mean with central planning? Oh, you mean with zoning? I would not call it central planning, and I hate when neoliberals try to do it as a gotcha and say central planning. It is not central planning. It is bottom-up planning. It is central planning in the same way that kind of old Toryism with the local lords in the United Kingdom, of course, they would be entitled. In the US, they would not be. With the local gentry deciding things very locally and thinking that any kind of state development is an affront to their freedom. I would not call that central planning. In the same way that you can talk about state action that is ridiculous, but is not central planning. And in your country, I learned recently that if you pay tuition to public school tuition in England is, I'm aware, I'm just saying that I dislike that people call zoning central planning. In fact, it is not legitimized as central planning, it is legitimized as community control. The community is not central planning. Relatedly, in the West Bank, when a settler decides that he wants to move downhill and kill some 60-year-old Palestinian who is tending his olive trees, that is not central. That is not central planning. That settler hates that the state of Israel doesn't already annex the West Bank and expel the Palestinian inhabitants. That settler probably is thinking about murdering the prime minister if the prime minister ever makes decisions that are not what Netanyahu is doing. That's a lot of things, but I would not call the actions of these settlers central planning. They're like a local group of extremists that the state tolerates. And it's the same with, and again, it's the same with zoning. I'm not saying that zoning is like that kind of extremism, but it's the same kind of like very local, I don't know if planning is the correct term, very local control. The standard term is local control. Hell, in your country, as I said, English public school tuition is tax exempt. You don't need to pay VAT on the luxury consumption of tuition to a private school. Apparently Keith said that he's going to eliminate that rule. Anyway, Fiona, what you said about Sabatyodi, air rights over rail yards are not really common, and there's a reason. By the way, what you can do is if you have too much rail yard space, which Paris did, for example, because these were good yards. Like this is BLC, like one of the secondary business districts of Paris, and this used to be a bigger rail yard for freight trains hauling coal into the city. This was no longer necessary, so they eliminated the rail yard. It's not like there's a rail yard and on top of it there are all these buildings, like, the various government ministries, the finance, I'm forgetting what else. It's no longer rail yards, and the same is true in London. In London, the goods yards at St Pancras and King's Cross have been demapped and redeveloped. So this is another example of adaptive reuse, by the way. So if you have too much yard space, which in the examples that I'm thinking of, this adaptive reuse is because of the decline of coal heating. This is something that goes back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So this is before Western Europe and the United States stopped generating power out of coal. So this is when there's still, maybe they don't build coal plants anymore in the 60s, I'm not sure. Maybe they are transitioning to gas, but they're not reducing the amount of coal that was burned. The decline of coal in the core first world, and I mean it in the Cold War sense. Maybe the joint of the Cold War and the development sense. So I would not talk about South Korea in that term, Poland, for example. But that's a 21st century phenomenon. But this was coal heating. So it used to be that you would heat your house in London winters by throwing some coals in the fireplace. So coal was supplied into the city for more than just power generation. Power generation would not be in the middle of the city. It would be outside the city where there's more land and where you don't want the pollution to hit so many people. So that's an example of adaptive reuse. You don't need the coal yards anymore. You don't need the goods yards anymore. So you redevelop them as housing and offices. I'm trying to remember which high-end office is here. Is Google here maybe? I don't remember. Or is Google at Victoria Station? I don't remember. Yeah, it's called for eating a house. Yeah. Okay, for IBX, yeah. Would you agree we're going to replan the entire things into a dead terminal like Hudson? Yeah, so Hudson Yards is unique because Penn Station's yards were designed for an overbuild, and even with that overbuild, the construction costs of the buildings on top of it at Hudson Yards were at the time about twice the average for high-end, high-rise Manhattan buildings on Firma. So in the dollars of the late 2000s, early 2010s, these buildings were about $12,000 of hard construction costs per square meter, per built-up square meter. And I never remember the standard comparison building that I used. It was 6,000, and even that building was kind of high-end. There were a bunch that were like 5,000 in the 2000s on Firma in Midtown. Like the only contemporary buildings in Manhattan that were as expensive as Hudson Yards were the ones involving World Trade Center, which besides not quite being Firma because pack yards, more importantly, the World Trade Center rebuild was like a shit show. Let's face it. Let's face it. Oh God. Oh God. I'm sorry. Then again, there's very few cities that are popular enough to warrant a metro. Why can they just replan? So at Sunnyside, it's So one of the points I'm going to make is that you probably can't easily adapt or reuse this unless you're actually shutting down the yard. Because you can overbuild here, but the construction costs are going to murder you. And now you can take a small penalty to construction costs for the privilege of being able to build in New York City. As I mentioned, it's a zoning issue more than anything. However, small penalty. And if it's a factor of 2 penalty, you're not fucking getting financing to do it in Sunnyside. I'm sorry. Like the only way you can adapt your views this at IPX is if you're kicking out the freight, which, I mean, you can argue either way. I mean, so that would be this example, and again, this is bear in mind, this is an example where in the city, really, I mean, you can still adapt your views, but also buildings fill much more easily than elsewhere. In Toronto, you were asking me, okay, you're asking about Western U.S. Because usually when I think of West, I'm thinking of it in like development economics or geopolitics or whatever, so I think of it as like Poland in the West. LA is mostly just a zoning question. LA is also not really, I don't think LA is much of an adaptive reuse place. Just because the industry in LA, as I understand it, is still going strong. Maybe not the defense industry that went in decline after the Cold War, but there's still a lot of industry around the ports, for example. So you're not redeveloping the port as like some kind of high-end luxury waterfront, because this is still an active industrial waterfront. Where the fuck would you, I mean, these are container terminals. The fuck are you gonna put luxury condos in? I'm sure you could do something in boardwalk areas of like the center of Long Beach or something. And judging by this, I'm not the first person who just thought about it, as in literally look at this land use. It's exactly like maybe not a luxury waterfront, but like a very commercial as opposed to industrial waterfront. Yeah, but port. So in general, the West is not that kind of economically mature. Like it's very recent. It's very recently developed, settled. The West, like the Western U.S. I mean, I think until the 2000. I think from like about the moment the first white Americans set foot there, in I guess the 1840s with the 48ers, until the 2000s, the West was the fastest growing of the 4 macro regions of the United States in every decadal census. I think the 2000s was the first time the West was not number 1 because the South overtook it, because so much of the West by population is California, and California only gained one congressional seat in the 90s, zero in the 2000s, lost one in the tens. Again, I mean, question. The growth is shifting elsewhere. And the point of that is because it's relatively recent growth, you're not going to see a bunch of post-industrial shit that is redevelopable. In LA, I think the stuff they're trying to redevelop as residential is downtown LA. And I don't think they're even doing office to residential conversion. Maybe they are, but I don't think they're. I think it's just they're finding small lots and then they're putting high-rises in them. Like maybe parking lots or maybe small buildings like this. They're demolishing and they're building. This is like in America, it's not considered offensive to build high-rises in city center, like commercial high-rises or condo high-rises in city center. No, I mean LA needs construction, but in LA again, there's not much infrastructure, older infrastructure to go around. In Shenzhen, I'm not going to hover over Shenzhen because Google Earth is famously erroneous in China because of the regulations requiring introducing little errors into this, so I can't hover over and see what's going on. But you can build these with TOD plans on top of them. Like Grand Central and Penn Station were both built that way. Like Penn Station was built with a lot of columns that you can see in old maps that I was using to do my 3D redesign of Penn Station, this one. So I was working from old columns, and this was when what on top of this is so this is Penn Station being daylighted, but what was there during World War II, for example, was a kind of traditional neoclassical station. And then they replaced that with Madison Square Garden, and it was possible to do so because the station had been pre-designed for such a thing. As was Grand Central, of course. In Grand Central, this was not considered politically or socially desirable after the destruction of the old Penn Station. Should it be considered offensive to build high-rises in city centers? No. This is not to Europe's credit that it does not have these. Israel is very German in certain ways, but not in that way. There are more buildings taller than 150 meters in Israel than in Germany. Israel has 9.5 million people, Germany has 84. I think Germany has 18 such buildings, and it's like all but one are in Frankfurt. I never remember where the 18th is. I think Bonn, but I'm not sure. This is a problem, and part of it is that usually in Europe where we have high-rise city centers, it's because the city centers are new in one way or another. So what do I mean by new? It could be in the suburbs, like La Défense. So Paris has a cluster of high-rises. It is not in the city. It is in La Défense. Now, at the scale of more than like 3 square blocks, the job density peaks not in La Défense. Again, at the scale of like 200 meters by 200 meters, sure, but at the scale of a couple square kilometers, the peak job density in Paris is here, thank you very much. So it's stuff that's in peripheral areas, because again, the idea was always that high-rises offend. Europe always had that attitude toward the United States, that the Americans lack culture, often bundled with the idea that the United States is stupid because they don't take socialism seriously. It's often like, it's not the only like Americans are stupid stereotype, but it's a very large looming and I think underrated one among like why Europeans look down on Americans in this. So anything that's like very brazenly commercial, like commercial high-rises, elicits this kind of disgust. So it is most allowed on the periphery. So, for example, the Tour Montparnasse is here. It is not where there should be, 50 of these, which is Les Halles, or the opera. It's kind of weird because the opera itself is the opera itself is a symbol of of the Second Empire, and somehow Napoleon III's monuments are considered less offensive than those of capitalism. Okay. Yes. So there are places where you do have high-rises, and yeah, so they could be peripheral in the sense of being newly built. Suburbs are newly built, not quite suburban, but still not historic. Central business districts, for example, Pardieu in Lyon is such. This not. I would not call that a hyperview. This is greenfield. This was kind of greenfield. This is the current center of Lyon. This was not even part of the same province as Lyon until after the Revolution. The river used to mark the boundary between Lyonnais, which was on this side, like this was the historic city, between Lyonnais here and the Dauphiné here, where the capital was Grenoble. They only moved these areas into the department of Rhône after they set up the departments after the revolution. They realized, wait, Lyon already has suburbs in a different department. Let's fix that. So it could be places that were heavily bombed. It could be places. So it could be places were being new and maybe non-traditional in a bunch of ways. So they separately were also built more automobile scale. So urbanists learned to hate them. Like it kind of reinforced the disgust toward them. Whereas, for example, in China, the opening of China likewise began from the periphery. Shenzhen was a fishing village when Mao died. It is like one of the, the number 5 city in China, like the largest single city in China are what? Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. Is Shenzhen maybe number 4? Or is like Wuhan or Tianjin somewhere higher? Because no, that's so like Guangdong, the entire province was rather peripheral. So it was the first to reopen because it was all local experimentation. And then that succeeded, and that paved the way to the rest of China doing that. So that was considered a success, but the equivalent, like allowing some districts of high-rises, is not considered as a success by European urbanists because these are bundled with other kinds of post-war development. And yeah, so you have high-rises in the city of London. Brussels has a bunch of high-rises. Frankfurt has a bunch of high-rises, but Frankfurt is a relatively new city. Remember, the Reichsbank, when it was called the Reichsbank, the Bundesbank, was never in Frankfurt. It was in Berlin. Frankfurt got the finance after during division. Hamburg got the media. Munich got the corporate HQs for industry. Bonn got the capital. And so maybe Hamburg was already a pre-existing very large city, but southern Germany and Frankfurt were kind of newer areas, and often these were more auto-oriented, and that led to this idea that high-rises are kind of bad for pedestrian-scale urbanism. And Shenzhen is number 4, yeah. Thank God for the City of London, yeah. London, the City of London is just like strange. Just please fold it into Greater London, please. Just don't do this kind of weird medieval core bullshit. Right? What do you mean by LA did something right? I mean, LA does not have a very centralized job geography. What educated you? The City of London? LA does not have very centralized job geography. Again, at the scale of 200 meters by 200, yeah, you can find spots that have higher job density. spots in Paris, but at the scale of a couple square kilometers. Paris has the bigger, or several tens of square kilometers. Paris has much higher job density. Sure, but they also need to commercialize near downtown areas, which is blocked by zoning. Like the United States, the other things, partly Europeans associate them with the United States, but also because American cities are not Manhattan, except New York, and they're not Tokyo, and they're not Seoul. So the situation in Tokyo, or the situation in New York, is the tall business district is surrounded by commercial near center areas. Tokyo much more so, I might just add, than New York. Even in New York, commercialization is kind of blocked north of 59th Street, for example. And in Tokyo, yeah, there's a bunch of very high density business districts with a bunch of super talls, maybe less than New York, more of a super tall city than Tokyo, but lots of high rises, as you can see, like commercial, government high rises. And then these keep expanding into nearby areas. So, so for example, the historic, maybe I shouldn't say historic when I'm talking about something that's from like 50 years ago. But the kind of traditional central business center of Tokyo is kind of the tri-point between Chiyoda, Chuo, and Minato. So it's around here, like these districts, like Marunouchi and Hibiya. But this keeps expanding west. Like it used to be still is, very high-income residential area, and it's commercializing, like Roppongi. So there is commercialization of near city center areas, and then you have Akiba pretty close here, and then this is not quite contiguous as a city, as a business district where you have very high density business districts in Shinjuku and Shibuya and in Ikebukuro, and in Shingon. And most American cities don't have it. They have a couple blocks of, it's fewer than Tokyo because smaller cities, but a couple blocks of high rises, and beyond that, I think of Shonion's screen a couple times in past videos how in Atlanta there's single family housing in both directions, east and west, within 2 MARTA stops of 5 points. So there is more, so the commercialization is kind of on a north-south axis, but east-west, like this is the land use within 2 stops on Metro. Of downtown Atlanta. So because of that, these high-rise American cities are not transit-oriented, even when they have the trains, in theory. So again, Europeans keep thinking, oh, the skyscrapers are bad. This is why there's also, in Juli's question, one of the parameters was, let's do it without too much high-rise construction, because that's considered bad. And the reason it's considered bad is they associate it with the United States, where what is bad is other things. Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. Oh, an LNG. Yeah, of course. In New York, the density between Lower Manhattan and Midtown is also rather high. The commercialization is blocked by zoning, but not entirely. There's a lot of it around 14th Street, for example. Okay, I'm gonna see whether this is gonna give me anything good. And then when the labels are all screwy. Okay, so this is in Zaha. Okay. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Like I can't tell whether this. Is it the rail? Is it that the tracks are spaced in a way that allows for column placement for an overbuild, like here? because that's kind of cool. But again, that's not exactly about adaptive reuse in areas that like have built their entire, upper three-figure kilometer subway systems in the gap of time between when like Kern built two extensions or something. Like a lot of it really like in China, it's something that's I think less relevant because in China, China is not a mature economy. Chinese cities are not mature infrastructure cities, even the ones that were rich early, like Shanghai, for example. I don't even think the cities in Manchuria, in like northeast China, are like that. And northeast China was the first part of China to industrialize because of the specifics of how Japanese colonialism worked. Like Japanese colonialism in Manchuria was developmental in the sense of like trying to proletarize Chinese people into working for Japanese industries, but that actually meant long-term management. And so in Japan, before and during the war, there were, let's call them, three different regimes in the occupied areas. There was the regime over Korea, which was, in Korea, the plan was forced assimilation and a kind of cultural genocide. But for example, if you look at the death toll for Koreans under Japanese rule, it was not insanely high. It was not all that high. They were drafted into the Japanese army and died that way, and there were the comfort women, but they were not. But it was not anything approaching physical extermination. And then there were the areas that Japan administered as long-term colonies, which were northeast China, aka Manchuria, and Taiwan. Taiwan, I think Japan annexed when was that? Like either 1890 something or like 1910 or something like that. So again, long-term colonialism and exploitation, but also the construction of infrastructure, obviously to serve Japanese imperial goals. And then there were the parts under Japanese occupation that Japan occupied later when it began the Second Sino-Japanese War and then World War II. So the rest of China, so China ex-Manchuria, and also Southeast Asia, where all I'm going to say in favor of Japan and what it did in these areas is that it didn't quite do anything like the Holocaust, but it basically committed every single war crime that you can think of from Nazi Germany against people who were not Jewish. So massacring entire towns on a whim, or in some kind of reprisal, or for no reason at all, yes. Mass starvation, yes. 10% of the population of Vietnam was killed in the war, in a famine. Very much engineered by the Japanese occupiers. And so this is the situation so in China it was not 10% because most of China was unoccupied. When the parts that were occupied, it was pretty horrific. But again, Manchuria was different, and I'm bringing it up because Manchuria had this early infrastructure. I think at one point, half of the rail network length in China was in northeast China, just because of that colonial history. So maybe there's a little bit of adaptive reuse, but again, even there, the economic growth in these provinces, it's less than in other provinces, but it's still rapid convergence by any kind of developed country norms. Would Northeast more about a Midwest or north of England? Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Because again, it would be very early. I would not call the Midwest the coal iron system. I would not call the Midwest that at all. Appalachia, yes. The Midwest, no. The Midwest's heyday was not early 20th century. It was middle of the 20th century. The Midwest heyday is post-war industry, but nothing beyond that. So stuff like cars, chemicals, steel, yes, in Pittsburgh. But for example, but Pittsburgh was not. If yeah, no, the Midwest is so. Largest Midwestern city has been Chicago since the middle of the 19th century, but Chicago was maybe the professional services center. But I'm forgetting what decade the census, maybe 1910 or 1920. The second largest has been Detroit. Detroit is still the second largest metro area in the Midwest, so that's cars. And Cleveland, Indianapolis also have pretty sizable auto industries. So this is like the economy of the 1950s, not the economy of the, let's say, 1900s, 1910s. Would redevelopment run against historical preservation societies? Yes, absolutely they hate that. Again, adaptive reuse, they were in favor. But that means, again, developing around existing infrastructure, and that means finding these disused factories, for example, to do, and I'm pretty sure it's already been done around the Brooklyn Army Terminal. So I doubt that this is like this looks very loft-like to me, and this looks entirely like adaptive reuse, and yeah, so it would be things like this, and yeah, the fact that there's a lot of parking is not the best for urbanist purposes, and you would probably want to turn this into a building and turn maybe this into a bit of a building, but honestly, this is thin enough. You would like the highest and best use is here, pretending that there's no such thing as IBX, which I don't think is going to matter that much here. The highest and best use here is high-rise luxury condo, facing the waterfront. And if you want, I mean, if it's a long corridor, then you need like this width, and if you're going to do European-style point access blocks, so every apartment has both bad view and the good view, then you would want probably 14-ish, 15, 16, like this, and then just do it as a ribbon, and watch as every Brooklyn neighborhood person with opinions will compare you to the love child of Hitler and Stalin. Oh, the yard will, so it will change the existing structure, but I just think that so new development tends to be higher end. The reason is that it's not fully depreciated, it maybe is using more modern materials, usually it's in greater demand. There are some exceptions. Yes, New Yorkers love their pre-war buildings with the taller ceilings, but they prefer pre-war to things from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. They don't prefer pre-war to things from the 2010s. And so this means that whenever you're building something new, you need to think about very middle-class norms of first of all, what they want in the apartment, but also where they're traveling. And specifically, urban middle class in New York works in Manhattan. Maybe possibly downtown Brooklyn or LIC, but most likely Manhattan, because because this is where high incomes are likeliest to be earned, and usually high income earners who work elsewhere are not the same kind of professionals. Usually there may be the owner of a small business, something like that, and that person, like, first of all, drives everywhere and therefore doesn't orient themselves ever based on public transit. and second, they probably also don't need condos. Often they're multi-generational within the city, so they have like their base already. Maybe they're gonna maybe they're gonna move within the neighborhood, but they're usually tied to a place. So if you're doing redevelopment, so if you're doing not redevelopment, you're doing new development, you need to think about what people who think with a straight face that it's difficult to raise a family in New York City on only $200,000 a year, and where they travel. So you want good access to Manhattan. Like the Navy Yard, for example, is starting to do this. This Fairmont, these I think are new buildings, maybe. Like they're doing a bunch of new buildings here plus adaptive reuse, and probably it's going to be more new buildings and adaptive reuse just because yeah, you can adaptively reuse these, or you can build these like this height. One of these generates more revenue than the other, and so this is not near the subway, but maybe so there's some copium about ferries. What the access actually is you take the Flushing Avenue bus to the subway, or you walk across the freeway to the subway. And yeah, so this is why I think IPX is not going to be influential on high-end redevelopment, just because the high-end redevelopment probably doesn't need IPX. It can affect redevelopment. It absolutely will lead to redevelopment if permitted, but it's going to be things that are smaller scale usually. Like maybe there's some spots that are single family or are just undeveloped, and they could put some random mid-rises there, I think is what Eric and Elif are looking at. Oh, hi. People are asking me about adaptive reuse in New York. And yeah, so let's go back for a second to Germany, because in Germany the situation is very different. In that, yeah, you can do entirely new development on top of rail lines, but as I said, this is something that urbanists retch from because they consider that to be too American, and then they associate it with other stereotypes with the United States. Are these stereotypes correct? No, they're not. It's like saying that you should not build high-rise downtowns because Americans do that, and in America it is legal to beat trans teenagers to death. Now, I think people can understand that there is zero connection between the built form of the United States and the fact that the United States got a certain transphobic bug leading to the part where high school teens beat a debatably NB teen to death, and there is no criminal prosecution for this. And anti-East Asian xenophobia, that's an Anglosphere thing. It's not associated with... People in continental Europe just don't think about Asia very much. When German urbanists think that strong city centers, like job centralization, like with high rises, they think of it as a bad thing, not because they think that Tokyo is bad. They visited Tokyo, of course. They visited, maybe Seoul is less likely to have been visited, but they don't associate that with Tokyo. They associate that with American cities. They associate it, which is kind of weird because they associate it with New York, but also with the transportation outcomes of not New York. Metro New York City, the MSA, has, I think, 33% or 32% model split. Metro Berlin is the same. Like, New York has higher public transport usage than most of Europe. All of Europe? No, absolutely not. And there are European cities that are much smaller than New York, and I don't just mean Paris, that murder New York on model split, like Stockholm, Prague, things like that. But it's a kind of weird thing where like a bunch of stereotypes meld together. So the high rise, the high density, the very in your face. This is a commercial city. Marketing in New York kind of melds together with land use and in transportation that is land and transportation that are not how New York works, but are how other cities work. Is this the first time I'm having problems with my internet connection at my new apartment? Possibly. I'm seeing that the stream is not being cut, so let's keep talking. So yeah, I don't think this is not xenophobia. This is, I don't want to say Ameriphobia, let's call it anti-Americanism. Like, it's kind of a weird European European left-wing anti-Americanism. And then on the right, maybe they're more pro-skyscrapers, but also on the right they kind of think the cities are for hippies, queers, immigrants, and green voters, all of which groups overlap, so they don't make much of an effort either in Berlin. Kai Wegner's response to lack of subway construction in the previous Olaf government is to announce Technologie Offenheit and to try to do maglev rather than to I don't know what's going on with this. Rather than to build fucking subways. So that's the problem. That's why high-rise is considered undesirable. It's just this idea, this urbanist idea that it's associated with like bad post-war autocentricity. So the adaptive reuse in Tempelhof is to turn this into a mid-rise neighborhood. But by the way, speaking of Berlin, I mean, there's adaptive reuse in Siemensstadt. So so it might not be clear at this detail level, but there's this branch of the ring, this one, that is called Siemensbahn, because Siemens, I don't remember if its HQ was here, but it had a lot of plants over here until Allied bombings, I imagine, put them out of everyone else's misery. But it's just not working. But so anyway, there is a lot of either disused or declining industrial shit in here that is being redeveloped. I think is residential and a little bit of commercial. One of the problems of European urbanist ideology is I believe that people work in city center and live outside city center is bad because it's commuting, and commuting is not big enough. So they try to do systems where there's a lot of commercialization of places that are not really transit nodes. So here, there are plans to do it here and Taken, to do some adaptive reuse here of maybe these buildings or something, the urban tech republic idea. And yeah, it's bundled to also extending the U-Bahn there. But it's still going to be at the outer end of one U-Bahn line. It's not going to be very easily accessible from most of the city except by car. Yeah, so can people see this? I'm going to the internet keeps not working. This says that I'm still streaming. So I kind of want to know whether people are still watching this. Are still capable of watching this, because the internet keeps not working for some reason. It says it's connected. Okay. Okay, great, you can see. Oh, okay, let's read this a little bit. Coming of the EMB weebs in Eastern England. Yeah, no, Siemens was founded in Berlin, yes. No, I can't see you, I'm sorry. I could upload but not download. Anyway, I'm back. So yeah, so Siemensstadt has this kind of adaptive reuse here. I think Siemens may even maintain an HQ here, but its main HQ is in München, post-war. The most based Siemens manager, I think, was Hans Feldmayer, I think is his name, or am I misspelling it? Yep. Yep, so he was in München after the war. Sorry, this dude. Yeah, so the German adaptive use things, again, it's kind of weird because I think Germany is actually the most industrialized country in never communist Europe by, I'm forgetting whether it's, I think share of population, not share of GDP. I think we have actually the highest share of the workforce that's employed in manufacturing in never communist Europe, which Germans think is kind of like the strength of the country, like why Germany is rich. Number two, a close second is Italy. And the Italian economy is kind of bad, and also everyone in Germany understands that. If anything, overrates that because Italian engineering for subways, for example, is very good. In many ways better than here. So, but that's still in decline. Like even like everywhere is deindustrializing. Maybe I think even China. The industrial production in the world is efficient enough that it needs fewer people these days. And certainly in richer countries that are climbing the value chain. Like biotech is not, like, I mean, biotech is research. Maybe there's some manufacturing involved, but I think the company itself just develops the drugs. And so there is, even in Germany, places to adaptive reuse, which is again, Siemensstadt. In the Ruhr, there should be a lot of these. I can't give you examples, I don't know the area nearly so well as Uli does. And the problem, especially in the Ruhr, is that the city centers are too weak. In general, manufacturing does not lend itself to very strong city centers. Post, the invention of the truck, resource mining, same thing. It's wherever the coal pit is. I think I gave a spiel about it in a video a couple months ago about how the Rhine-Ruhr is among the large metro areas of Germany the one with the weakest public transport ridership. Like within Poland, the Polish Ruhr, let's call it. There are in Katowice, like Szaskę and so on. That is a rather auto-oriented area. The way someone I know from that area told me that even like the service economy there sometimes gets someone in Bytom to go do a service job, like an uphill service job in Gliwice, and then someone in Gliwice does a job in Bytom, and of course have to drive. And in contrast, in more, let's call them normal, like strong cities, Gliwice, this is Gliwice, and this is Bytom. So in contrast, the more traditionally monocentric Polish cities like Warszawa, like quite a lot of urban rail ridership, the metro and the trams, and the same sort of Krakow, forgetting all the others that we saw. I think it's Warszawa, Krakow, and Wrocław are the main one, maybe. And so, again, I'm not going to, so this is a thing in the Rhine-Ruhr, okay? And if you just do develop it at random spots there, people will drive. Because like their destination, like there's no way of guaranteeing that if you build something in a residential area of Essen, like here or something, then that the destination of the residence is going to be the center of Essen, which is accessible by the Stadtbahn. It could very well be somewhere in, let's say, Duisburg, and then yeah, I can transfer, or I can just drive. It could be in Bochum, and again, you can go here and transfer, or you can just drive. Communism is a successful Rhenish cultural export. Wait, was Karl Marx from the area? He was born in Trier, that's not really, I mean, yeah, it's Rhenish, but it's not like Rhenish, if you know what I mean. Like, Trier is like, not like this, like Trier is like, somewhere, like where in Rheinland-Pfalz is Trier? Here, yeah, okay, yeah, technically Rhenish. Yeah, technically, sure. Like this is the core of the Rhineland. Sorry, not sorry. About choosing it's Osaka, I mean, yes, there is an Osaka, it's called Köln, which is way too peripherally located. There's Düsseldorf, which is also kind of peripherally located. Again, the star cores are Dortmund and Essen. But they're not Osakas, they're not Kyotos. Bonn is not a Kyoto either. I've not been to Kyoto, I've been to Bonn. But everything that I've seen of Kyoto suggests it's like not. Yes. These are like Kobe or Kobe, if that makes sense. And then Osaka or something like that. I don't remember how the Morris breaks, maybe it's called Osaka. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, I guess Ganshin has a high transit model split, but also, and it's and it's polycentric, but I mean, the individual centers, Osaka, Kyoto, and Kobe are enormous. So, sure, polycentric, but, I mean, yeah, I'm willing to believe that. Like, it's, very, like, I guess also European centered, because like a lot of this is also close to the Netherlands, so it's like part of the Dutch motorized economy, and this is generally a problem, which is areas that are near borders in Europe have less planning capacity than areas that are in the interior of the country. Like Berlin is kind of interior for because public transportation requires more top-down planning, more central planning. Highways do not. Highways can be done with like one group of business people wants the highway built. You don't need that much planning capacity to do it. This is why weaker states have more highway-centric transportation. This is why Indonesia, for example, or the Philippines, or Thailand, or Malaysia is so much more auto-oriented. Like all these countries are so much more auto-oriented than, okay, Singapore is a city-state, but they're also all much more auto-oriented than, let's say, South Korea, or Japan, or Taiwan, or China. I mean, you can check how much a Jakarta MRT gets daily peak. This is a metropolitan area the same size as Tokyo. And yeah, there's also, I mean, it's not most of the public transportation. There's there's also, yeah, the KRL commuter line. And yeah, I mean, it's not 90,000. I mean, this is more, but this, for commuter rail, this is like Berlin levels of ridership in a metro area the size of fucking Tokyo. Yeah, no. And so the upshot is that there isn't a lot. And this is, I think I vlog about cross-border rail. I might do it again if people really want me to. That cross-border rail, I mean, let's see, if it's something very flashy that national governments are going to get into, that could be built. Like, it hasn't been here, like the lines on the Belgian side are kind of meh, and the German lines have not been built at all. But for example, this has been built. Paris to Brussels is fast all the way. Expensive, but fast all the way. From both cities to London, same thing. Like, that can be done if it's something very flashy. But the commuter lines, like, that's not going to happen. Like, it's not something that the private sector can ever do on its own. The public sector requires the consent of multiple governments, and that's just not going to happen for random local regional lines, like the regional line from Eindhoven to somewhere here, or anything involving Saarbrücken, or like from Strasbourg to points east. John Worth was just complaining about the poor state of regional rail across the Rhine border between France and Germany, because again, it's something that can only be done by the state or by something like the state. And I mean, the state is here and the state is here. And again, it's not something the private sector will ever do, so you need too much central planning for that. So I guess this is why like there's going to be like more rotorization like near the borders, because the private economy doesn't stop at the border, but public infrastructure kind of does. Oh yeah. The people are yearning for a lot of shit. I mean, it's one of the things. Like I mean, but that's an entirely separate rant about how Eurosceptics think that like everyone is like them, and then you look at polling on the EU army, and Euromonitor had to kill the link to that because it showed how in every country that was a member of both NATO and the EU at the time, it was in 2018, not counting the UK, there was a majority in favor of an EU army. The only country in the EU where there was a solid majority against an EU army was the United Kingdom. And they didn't want to like publish the poll too much to avoid giving the Brexit press too much ammunition. But no, you ask what people in Europe want, and then what the Eurocrats are capable of achieving, and it's like two different worlds. Anyway, so the point of like building on existing infrastructure okay, so in this area you might also need to deal with the fact that your regional rail network only goes in two directions and all four. I mean, like, look, this is 40-something. It's not like this is not going to ever be a very strong commuter line. Okay, this is 42 out of a city center that's much weaker than Berlin. Yeah, there's an S-Bahn line that goes, I think, to Strasbourg. No, it's technically 35, but it's not straight, so it's probably more like 40, 42. But that's only in one direction. Usually the lines are 42, like they go well beyond S-Bahn range. And I mean, like, yeah, people do take the train to Nauen, but that's not where the high ridership of the Berlin public transport metro comes from. And so if you're trying to think about how you're planning the regional rail in the city, yeah, it's like, I mean, yeah, of course, Duisburg is mostly going to live in connections to Köln, to Düsseldorf/Köln and to Essen/Dortmund. And yeah, I mean, if there's a station in an area, probably in between, because you're not going to dedicate a new line just to TOD, not in Duisburg, not in Essen, not in Dortmund, not in Köln. But if there's a line between two decent-sized cores, between a core and like a reasonably dense residential area, and then it passes through something, yeah, that you can redevelop. And again, it could be adaptive use, it could be just building a bunch of mid-rises. The European distaste for high-rises is not the end of the world right here. It could always hover on something and look at it briefly, like this random spot, like this is already kind of mid-rise. but maybe this, like, but it's not very tall neighborhoods. Like, these are like what, 5 floors? In Berlin, they probably would be 8. Yeah, I could find some things here that are like 3 or 4 floors and turn them into 8, or yeah, like this looks like 3 floors in a dormer, maybe 3 in an attic. I'm not sure if this is 4. This is 4. You can find some things here to turn into 7, 8 floors, and that's going to be fine. If you're rebuilding. Note by the way that there aren't these giant parking lots here that you could redevelop. Like, it requires a certain history of decline to be able to do so. So in Berlin, often it's either post-war shit involving deindustrialization or wall. But this is what they're actually planning. Eine klare Linie für die Zukunft. Zum Download. Oh, you say download, you don't say download. Okay, let's look at the 32 one because. Okay, so then I'm never going to be able to tell. Okay, which station is the one that you randomly hovered on? Essen Krein Nord, and that's a branch, right? The main line goes south, I think, right? So from Essen Hauptbahnhof, or is it just somewhere here that is not being, that is not important enough to show? Because I can absolutely believe it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, all of these look. Wait, what frequency are we talking about? If it's 4 lines, then it means that the numbers repeat every 15 minutes, right? And then there are these. Yeah, that's not bad frequency. SN Stille Host. Is it this one? No. This is Wattenscheid and Torp, which is here. Okay, so I guess this is the one that we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Kai is not down, but it's here. Yeah, it's turned for 15 minutes. You can like redevelop that. It's fine. I mean, it's not going to be the best public transit ever, but it's pretty fine. Right, but I mean, honestly, if you want to like do something really wild, open an infill station and you develop this, but I'm sure this is like under 15 nature protections for like the 17 entirely not endangered but beloved species in the area. Yeah, as I said, like, I mean, adaptive reuse does require something to have declined, which could be in the case of industry, but often if this is residential area, especially near the train, it's unlikely that that's what will happen. Is there going to like transition to just taking questions from this point? "17 not endangered species, that's weak British environmental legislation protects imaginary newts and bats." Yes, I'm well aware of the land use in London on top of some underground stations. It's like golf courses next to the tube, the endangered species of the upper class twit. The difference is this is at the end of the tube, and here people on Fedi have unironically called this a treeless parade that used to be an airport, an ecosystem. Sorry, biosphere was the word used. Biosphere. Yeah. I voted for the NIMBY party here, by the way, because the alternatives were worse. Do I have a looks license yet? No. Would suburban metros be appropriate for cities like Phoenix? For what purpose? Like, I mean, you need to, the amount of TOD you need to do in Phoenix to get public transit ridership there to be at the level where it might exist is insane, and we're talking about both city center commercialization, which means, yeah, you see, like, yeah, there are a couple of high rises there, but I mean, just look at what's around them, it's parking. I mean, I'm not going to call this walking distance because Phoenix, but objectively speaking, this is walking distance. Land use, walking distance to the center of Phoenix. It's not even dense single family housing, they're empty lots here. And if this were Detroit, people mock it as an example of the city's terminal decline. And yeah, so the amount of TOD that's not like adaptive use, but just building fuck ton of mid-rises here, like a bunch more commercial buildings here is like, it's not about what mode you're doing, it's about how much you're willing to transform Phoenix into something else. I haven't seen the bats yet. Yeah, I mean, you can cram whatever you want. I mean, at the end of the day, what matters is what kind of dude you're doing. Also, why the hell does this map make it look like the center of the metro area is Tampa and not like actual Phoenix? It's not here. Anyway, no, I don't have a looks license. I don't think so. Anyway, are there other questions? Also, wait, it's only like an 8-second lag. Do I think Houston will run into trouble with its infill? What do you mean trouble? Again, there are different kinds of social problems, most of which have nothing to do with urbanism. Again, the fact that, the murder was in Oklahoma, but Texas isn't any different. The fact that it's illegal to murder trans people and non-binary people in Texas is not a matter of urbanism, so what kind of trouble are you talking about? There's this mentality in small towns that suburbs require more local spending on amenities or something, but it's something that I might want to talk about, why that's not the right way to think about development ever, because under what kind of spending regime, under what kind of tax regime, in the United States it's not even the same across the country, because different states and macro regions have different ways of divvying this. So it's often, and some of the development incentive regimes are not even the same within each state. So often it's just really not about urbanism, but about inability of American states to say, we are allowing this because it's the private sector and we're a capitalist country, or we're taxing this because, yeah, we're a capitalist country, but the New Deal happened, it was a crowd pleaser deal. Oh, too much traffic. Houston is popular among white Yambies in England, yeah, and it's popular among not just white Yambies in the United States, who constantly point out that despite the fact that Texas is very stingy about any kind of relief, there's much less homelessness, for example, in Houston than in California or New York. And it's not even a matter of weather, because lying down on, like, rough sleeping in the heat is not what's gonna kill you. Not in the Houston heat. Houston is not 50-degree heat. Houston is like 30, 35-degree heat. It's annoying, but if you can get water, you will not die. Rough sleeping in the winter is what kills you, and Houston does not have cold winters. So it's not even that, oh, homeless people just move there because of the weather, which is also false in San Francisco, but I mean, evidently, San Francisco has that huge problem and Houston doesn't. Too much traffic. Houston already has too much traffic. I mean, adding some more drivers into Houston is not gonna. I mean, yeah, it's gonna make things worse, but it doesn't matter where they're being added. This is like one of the constraints on the size of a central business district in an auto-oriented city is that your ability to actually put enough cars into one small location is constrained. It's not actually free to widen a freeway. Not with, like, look at these interchanges. To upgrade the interchange, all of that. I mean, they don't build tunnels in the United States, but they do a lot of above ground shit that is not free. And that is a limit, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the richest American cities, even by income from work, so ignoring the landlords, they're Bay Area, New York, Seattle, Boston, DC, so like the cities that do have public transit. It's just easier to agglomerate in this situation. But again, that's not about infill, that's just like auto-oriented cities being auto-oriented. It doesn't matter whether, like, you put the houses, the extra buildings here or here, you're going to run into the same problems. Anyway, what do you mean by not working? I mean, it works in the sense of there's cheap housing. It doesn't work in the sense that the ability of Texas to have the per employee productivity of New York, Boston, Washington, Seattle, or San Francisco, even when oil prices were high, it was not that. It was not quite on par. And now oil prices are not that high anymore. Like, remember, Houston, when oil prices came down, I think it was 2014, 15, Houston, if you look at BA data and then, like, the regional per capita income levels, Houston underwent a larger shock to its economy than Greece did in the Great Recession. Clogged freight main lines, that's not an urbanist problem, because that's an entirely industrial problem, plus how the American class 1 freight railways think. Okay, but I mean, Phoenix could at any point have also done the aggressive redevelopment around city center as Vancouver, and it clearly didn't do so. And yeah, you can maybe argue that it's harder to do these downtown high-rises without public transit, but you can absolutely commercialize near center neighborhoods without that, and they did it. Like, this really is not about failure. But anyway, so no, the journey with Houston is, like, it has a lot, like, I don't think any of the social problems that we're thinking about in Houston is about how it does redevelop. It has a specific social problem involving being too auto-oriented. That is, yeah, something that if they build more housing in the right spots could be alleviated, but that's, like, not what I think of as the worst utopia issue of Houston. Are there other questions? It's been an hour 30. Still shocked by how it's only 7 seconds of lag because in the previous apartment it could be 30. Sure, no problem, Bernard. I'm gonna do one last call for questions, and if there aren't any, then we can break. And you don't need to wait awkwardly as long because look at this difference. Right, so thank you all for watching. I will see you once again either 3 days or a week. We will see, depending on final moving schedule issues. So thank you all for watching, and ciao, ciao. Oh, and thank you for proposing the topic. Sorry I couldn't talk about the roars much because again I don't know it very well. But the adaptive reuse issue and how it interacts with public transit is actually really interesting. Like in the context of the cities I'm more familiar with. So anyway, thank you, and